Anybody who follows my channel will know that since the release of Tonex, I've been doing instructional videos to try and help folks out to get the most out of their Tonex software, and after that, Tonex Pedal. Well, because of that, I do get a lot of questions forwarded to me. I do discuss with a lot of people a lot of the topics concerning how the best way to use Tonex is and just even how to understand how to use it. So today I'm starting a new series, which is going to be called A Beginner's Guide to Tonex, where we're going to dive in to some of the most commonly asked questions that I receive about both Tonex software and Tonex Pedal. And today we're going to kick things off talking about the different capture types, the different styles or types of captures we can make with Tonex, because this is a question I get forwarded to me a lot. So without further ado, let's dive right over to Tonex, and we're going to take a look at those, and I'm going to give you an example of some of the most commonly used capture types. All right, so here we are over in Tonex, and this is the standalone version, which will allow me to show you the modeler tab. So over here, we have the player tab at the top, which will allow us to choose our tone models and our presets. And we also have the librarian tab, which will allow us to transfer presets back and forth, but I don't have that hooked up today. But this is the tab we're interested in today, the modeler tab. So when we go over here, the first page we get is the instrument selection. Well, this is pretty simple. If we're capturing a bass amp or something for the bass guitar, we are going to choose bass, but we're going to be dealing with guitar today. And we hit next. This is the page we are going to be interested in today because we end up with 5 possibilities. We have amp and cab. We have complex rig, we have stomp, we have amp, and we have stomp and amp. So starting over here at amp and cab, this is the selection we are going to make. As it says here, model an amp head and cabinet or a combo by using 1 or 2 microphones. So this is where we're going to do the traditional in the studio miking of a guitar amp. We place our microphone of choice through the signal chain of choice. We position that to get it sounding just right, dial the amp in, and then we will model the sound of the amp and cab. Now here's the important point here. We can, in the software, separate the amp and the cab. The big question in the debate is how accurate, or how does Tonex know which part of the signal is the cab and which part is the amp? And depending on who you talk to, some folks think that it does an excellent job at separating the amp portion and the cab portion so that we can swap to different impulse responses or cabs, and some folks feel it does a horrible job. I'm not here to tell you one way or the other what it does, but there is a solution to whatever problem might arise here. So we'll discuss that a little later in the video in more depth. We have complex rig, which is going to basically be the same as amp and cab, but with some sort of overdrive distortion pedal in front of the amp or any sort of stomp box that is capable of being captured in Tonex. Now keep in mind, we can't capture delays and reverbs or modulation effects. This is going to be for overdrive effects, distortion effects, etc. Now when we do this, there is no way to separate the stomp box, distortion pedal, whatever we put in front of the amp from the amp capture. That's not the way this works at this point. We can separate the amp and the cab, but we can't separate that. So it becomes part of this complex rig. It's more about folks knowing when they look at the tone model that, oh, look, this is, a Marshall amp captured with a tube screamer in front of it, or whatever the combination might be. So the idea of saying, oh, good, I'm going to capture the complex rig and then I'll turn the overdrive pedal on and off after the fact in the model, that's not going to work. That's not how this works. It's going to just be more about telling us after the fact that this was captured in that fashion. And I'm really not sure if under the hood Tonex is treating this any different than an amp and a cab capture. That might be an interesting topic for another video, to treat a complex rig like an amp and cab and capture it twice and see if there's any difference between it. Anyways, we can also just capture stomp boxes. Now, what's interesting is I've had a few questions where folks have asked me, could I just capture the preamp or just the power amp section of an amplifier? And honestly, I haven't tried it, but I really don't see why we wouldn't be able to. The preamp part of an amplifier, which we could access just by utilizing the send out of an effects loop before it hits the power amp in most amps, is going to be much like just capturing a stomp box. So that would work. Now, if we were to capture the power amp, we would have to capture the output, but plugging into the return of the effects loop in most amps to access just the power amp. So again, I don't know what the results would be. I think it would be fine. We could do that either as an amp and cab capture, I guess, or as a stomp capture. The problem is then I've had folks say, well, can we then combine our preamp capture and our power amp capture? Well, that would require us to have 2 instances of Tonex software running in a DAW in series. It could not be done on Tonex Pedal unless we had 2 pedals. It could be done, though, in Amplitude 5, which allows us to have 2 Tonex models open at a time, 1 stomp and 1 amp capture. So those are the possibilities, but we also can just capture our stomp boxes, and we could utilize our Tonex pedal just as an overdrive pedal, which would be very cool, I guess, if that's how somebody wanted to use it. So I have done stomp captures. They work great. Obviously, we can also add a cab to those, so we would kind of be going, preamp or stomp, bypassing a power amp into a cab. And, there's no right or wrong answers here. You can try this stuff out, see what sticks, see what works, and go from there. Bottom line is, as I always say, if you're getting a great tone, then who cares how you're accomplishing it? As long as it's a great tone, it's inspiring, and you're happy with it. Moving on to just amp captures. Now, this is going to be capturing an amp without a speaker. I'm going to give an example of the amp versus the amp and cab capture a little later in this video using a tone model bundle I just put out this week of the Soldano SLO30 classic amp. Absolutely killer models, absolutely killer amp. And I did them both as DI captures and amp and cab captures. We'll do a little comparison after the fact. Not that it's going to really answer any major questions, but just so folks have a better idea of what's happening. So the amp capture is going to be capturing just the amp. We need to somehow take a speaker out of our amp or a direct out of our amp while still, in a lot of cases, depending on the amp you have, having a load attached to the amp. That's the important part. So there's a bunch of scenarios depending on the amp and the other equipment you're using, but this is going to capture the amp with no speaker. Now, some people prefer this. They think that this is, and I'm not saying that they're right or wrong, that this is superior if you want to maybe use Tonex to feed into some sort of Class D power amp or into the return of your tube amp and playing it through a real life guitar speaker cab. And maybe they're right. The algorithm that's used over here by the software to remove the cab, some folks feel it doesn't do a great job and it messes with the tone. Again, I don't know if this is accurate or not. That's going to be up to each individual person's taste. But over here, we're getting the pure amp tone captured without the cab. So the software doesn't have to do any heavy lifting or any work to remove the cab portion of it. So I've come across some folks who just swear by the DI captures, the amp only captures, some that swear by the amp and cab, and that's why I'm trying as best I can to offer on all my tone model bundles both options. So with the release of the Soldano or the Sold 30 tone model bundle, I have one that is 7 amp and cab captures and one that is 7 amp just DI direct captures. And it's really going to be up to the end user. The reason I separate them now is because it really seems like I find most folks want one or the other. Some just the way they're going to use it through an FRFR maybe, or through their studio monitors, just want the amp and cab captures. Other folks that are going to use it through a real guitar amp or into a real guitar speaker cab want just the amp captures, but that's going to just grab the direct. And then we have the last one, the Stomp and Amp Captures, which is going to be the direct version of the complex rig, where again, we're going to combine some sort of overdrive distortion pedal in front of the amp and capture that direct, or as we said, without a cab. So those are the types of captures we have and that we can utilize. Now coming over to Tonex within Cubase so I can record this, you'll notice here that I have my 7 Sold 30, which is a Soldano SLO30 classic captures, DI, clean OD 1, 2, 3, 4, push 1 and 2. But then I also have my Sold 30 alt clean. Same thing, OD1, OD2, OD3, OD4, push 1 and 2. So 7 of each of them. What I've done is I've baked into the preset. If we go to the tone model, this is just what it is. There's no cab on it. It's not going to sound right, especially if we go to a distorted tone, right? There's just no cab. That's going to be awful. But if we go to the preset, what I've done is I've baked in a custom IR of my Rev 212 cabinet, a killer cabinet loaded with vintage 30s that I mic'd with a Cascade Fathead mic. And it sounds like this. Now, if we compare that to the amp cab capture of the clean, this is also going through that same cabinet. On the clean, you know, there's differences, but we don't notice maybe this massive difference that we would otherwise. But when we get into the distorted tones is where it's going to be a little different. So let's go to the Sold 30 OD1. So this is the direct capture with this IR that I made using the Rev 212 cabinet. Let's compare that to the amp cab captures of OD1. Now keep in mind when I dial in the direct amp captures, I don't have the amp dialed in the same way. It has to be dialed in specially for those, is what I've found after doing literally hundreds of these in both tone model bundles I've put out and in experimenting to figure out how this works the best. The idea here, though, is that if we go to swap the cab out on this, the software has to do this so-called heavy lifting and say, well, we've got to guess what the cab portion is. So let's go to like one of our VIR cabinets here, and we'll just go to this 412XXL. It works quite nicely. Go back to our original cab. I'm really not going to say one of those is better or worse. The cab switched out quite nicely, and I don't think anybody without knowing what was happening would really complain about that VIR cabinet being put in place. Now, what if we did the same thing on the DI-OD1? So we have our IR baked in here. The nice beefy one. That has a lot to do with the Cascade Fathead mic I used on that. On the other example, the non-DI version, I was using a Bayer M160 ribbon mic. So what if we switched out to the same VIR cabinet that we were using a moment ago, and we'll just come in with, I think we're similar settings here like so. Let's do this. Let's lock the cabinet, and maybe let's go back and forth between the DI'd version, which doesn't have the cabinet baked in. For some reason, this jumps up in volume quite a bit, something to do probably with the cab, because those are otherwise fairly balanced. Again, the amps are dialed in very different, so this is not really a scientific comparison. The point is kind of more along the lines of maybe answering, can we go to an amp cab capture and swap the cabs out? Well, that's ultimately, again, I'm not here to tell you yes or no. It's going to be up to the individual involved in doing it and what they want. If they're hearing something they don't like, then they shouldn't do it. But I think for the most part, we can get away with it. But it's also nice maybe to have the DI tracks as well. So let's unlock our cabinet here and go through some of these other tones. So here's a Sold 30 DI clean. Neck pickup. Sounds really killer with a telly, actually. Going to push 1, sort of edge of breakup. Still on channel 1 on the amp. Push 2. That fathead mic is very beefy. If you find a little too beefy for your system, you can come up to the depth control. And just mess with that a little bit and it sounds great. Going to OD1. OD2, a little higher in gain. So a really nice vast array of tones that really kind of nail down that soldano tone. So for anyone's interested, I do have the DI'd version available and I do have the amp cab version available. I will have the links below to those if you want to check those out. I also have a free tone model up on ToneNet that is actually in the top 10 tone models this week after just a couple days, and it's getting some great reviews from folks. So I'm so happy that people are enjoying these tones. So I hope that answers some of your questions about the different types of tone models and what the capabilities are of them, because that is a question I've been getting a lot, and it's a question I've been seeing asked a lot in the forum. So I hope that does clear things up. Today I want to leave you with the demo video for my Sold 30 DI tone models that were just released yesterday. These are the direct versions of the Ultimate bundle. So both are available. I will have the links below. They both sound great. Just really depends on how you want to use them, or maybe you want both of them. So you have the best of both worlds. So here's the demo video for that. Thank you guys so much for sharing your time with me. Please like the video, share it with anybody you think would get some use or enjoyment out of watching it. And also please subscribe to my channel. Hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I'll be back soon with some more really soon. Ciao for now.